So, predator or prey? Are you a buyer or a seller? Um, there are plenty of pitfalls as you look at the entire end-to-end um, M&A process, and we'll talk about some of those today. Unfortunately, this chap on the left-hand side experienced a few pitfalls himself. This is actually a picture I took on an island called Il Fouche, an uninhabited island in the Caribbean, right after Maria. Unfortunately, that used to be someone's sailboat. Hartman Executive Advisors is about 18 years old. We're an independent leadership and IT advisory firm. We work with organizations largely in the middle market, although we have clients that are larger. And we help organizations align their IT strategy and their M&A transactions in such a way that we drive them the most value and get the most value out of those investments. If you look at the cross-functional nature of IT, particularly as it relates to M&A, IT practitioners tend to have the broadest view of the enterprise, and having that skill set as a part of your team during diligence as well as integration is a real valuable asset and capability. As we look at the three pillars of our firm, and we pride ourselves on being independent. We're paid by no one other than our client. We don't get paid from software vendors or technology vendors or any partners. So we have no bias. Our focus is on aligning the technology to the business model our clients have chosen. We're trusted. We take our confidences seriously. We don't share client names, and we don't talk about our clients to anyone other than our clients. And then strategic. Many of our people sit on the business or corporate executive leadership teams as their IT partner, their IT leader, and help the leadership team really get a better handle on how technology can be used and some of the things that we can do to drive real material value propositions. With respect to M&A, I'm not going to go through all this, but we have full life cycle experience. We do work on all deal sizes and shapes. So we look at asset and stock deals, both simultaneous and a close with a window. And we can help you with day one readiness right through to the future state plan. But our focus when we engage in diligence and integration, and very often we are both partners, we act as the diligence partner as well as the integration partner. Our focus is really understanding the value case, identifying those risks and barriers to achieving that value case, and any impacts that could be made to that value case through diligence, but also working on the back end through integration to ensure that that value case is realized at the end of the day. So poll question number one. Again, Michelle had indicated there's a circle with some ellipses in it. The first question is, on which side of the M&A transaction have you been most involved? So I get a sense for your experience, and I can gauge my talk accordingly. So we have buy and sell and none. All right. Well, it looks like we're reasonably distributed across sell side, buy and sell, and none. So that's great. Thank you for participating. We'll move on. Um, so the agenda for the talk, there's, sorry. First, I want to cover some of the forces that are impacting the M&A landscape. Since we've come out of COVID, there are a number of dynamics happening in manufacturing and distribution firms that are really driving a new thought process around M&A, where M&A had traditionally been used to build scale or enter new markets. We're actually looking at M&A as a vehicle for fundamentally transforming the entire value chain or supply chain in some cases. So we'll talk a little bit about that M&A landscape and some of the forces impacting what's happening today and in 23. We'll talk about the M&A pitfalls, some common causes. We'll share some case studies as well as some lessons learned. And then finally, in the last segment, talk about avoiding the M&A pitfalls altogether and some of the things that we can do as you enter into a deal. So if we look at this amalgamation of charts here, lots of data, basically what we see is, in 20, we had PMI dip to a pretty significant low globally as well as in the US. Coming out of COVID, a couple things happened. First of all, organizations realized how fragile their supply chains were. And that we basically had clusters of capability and clusters of supply where there were regions that really were overweight with respect to where our supply came from. And then those regions actually represented risk during COVID. So coming out of that deep trough, a couple of things happened. Organizations started to acquire with two intents. One is to fundamentally rethink their supply chain and rethink the risk associated with that supply chain. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But also, what's happened is as we look to both historically and where we're headed, pent up demand, record levels of dry powder at PE, and a real need for scale as well as supply chain transformation drove a lot of the M&A activity in 21. But as you all know, these rising interest rates have put a damper on the M&A deals as well as the value of those deals in 22. As we look across manufacturing and distribution, yeah, certainly in the middle market, which is where Hartman tends to focus, the middle market also sees a slowdown in deal flow as well as deal value. But the valuations, it's interesting, the valuations seem to be holding up for manufacturing firms a little better than it does for distribution firms. Now, I mentioned that M&A is being used as a tool coming out of COVID to fundamentally rethink the business. And I think this is important context for us as we move forward in this journey and as companies look to grow through M&A. First, traditionally, we've always used M&A to create scale and consolidation. That will continue to happen. I think what's noticeable here is that we're realigning portfolios and products and channels, which is also not new, but is being done in a different way today than perhaps in the past. We're looking now more critically at our products and our product designs to find out which of those product elements represent the greatest risk in our supply chain and create lead times and therefore product risk, and looking to redesign those products to take some of those risks out. Looking to expand into services to create a more robust offering, not exclusively products based, but to bundle services with products to create a more robust solution offering. Of course, as we look to digital transformation and digital capabilities, there are acquisitions that will be made specifically because there's an organization that have really capitalized on technology. Many of our clients experience some technical debt, and this is certainly an area where driving the valuation because of your deployment of technology could help. Um, and then looking to regionalize the supply chain. And we talk about bringing manufacturing closer to home, talk about bringing more of our distribution closer to customers, and looking at manufacturing closer to sources of supply. So, how do we nearshore or onshore more of this capability? These are discussions that are happening across the industry, across markets right now, as we look to, again, de risk the supply chain and then increase sustainability. ESG has become a pretty dominant um, capability and narrative now. And as you'll see in a minute, a real driver of some of these transactions. To kind of support that, Intros did a survey in 20 this year, earlier this year, and they looked at 1,500 global decision makers to understand what's happening with their organizations, how they're using M&A, and what they're doing with supply chain. And they are making wholesale changes to their value chain, to their entire end-to-end supply chain, looking to nearshore or reshore. In fact, 51% have existing contracts that they're looking to bring closer to home. It's also mitigating concentration risks. So we've got so much product in, if you're in a chip maker, so much product in Taiwan. We're hearing now through the CHIPS Act that we're looking to build more capability and not only manufacturing capability, but the universities need to generate more of that skill set out of the universities. So bring that education base back as well. Um, Looking, part of the issue is if you look over the next 3 years, the majority of respondents, people that participated, are going to increase the number of firms in their supply chain. Now, this is different than being n-tiered. As an n-tiered supply chain, your supply chain just gets very deep. And so you might have a supplier that produces a product for you, but that supplier may have a supplier and they have a supplier. So that n-tiered, very deep supply chain is actually generating a fair amount of risk. To mitigate that risk, organizations are looking to broaden their supplier base, and to go wide rather than deep. Because it gives them greater access and greater visibility, and it's a lot easier to share data around product availability, et cetera. And really looking to reduce the complexity and reduce product variations so that design becomes easier. The products necessary, the bill of materials necessary, really represents minimal risk in that case. And we're using M&A to identify opportunities to accelerate that, because doing that organically, building those factories, those plants, in the case of a chip manufacturer is 2 years. I had the pleasure of working at IBM's East Fishkill plant back in the 80s. And I got a sense, I watched that plant get built. And now that we're much more efficient about building those today. Um, but the point is that if you can acquire, for example, if you can acquire a supplier, not necessarily a chip manufacturer, but if you can a supplier, a parts manufacturer, that'll help you start mitigating that risk and integrating across the value chain. So become much more vertically integrated. And in fact, a Deloitte survey recently suggested that 23% of organizations are looking to vertically integrate as a way of mitigating that supply chain risk. And again, using M&A as a tool. Um, and as we look for traditional opportunities to acquire, and the reason and the strategy behind these acquisitions, McKinsey is suggesting that perhaps we need to open up the aperture a little bit and look at different reasons to acquire and different assets to acquire, different capabilities. So the traditional reasons of building scale and looking at the best of the best for supply chain pricing and really optimizing around volume and mix is to look at other capabilities here and to broaden the aperture. We think about what the implications are of all of these supply chain changes on M&A, right? And we think about what has to happen. Well, in diligence, I mean, buyers have to conduct a very deep diligence now to the extent they can to look at the impacts of supply chain issues, constraints. What are those constraints? What are the sources of supply? What are those geopolitical risks that are intrinsic in the current supply chain? Um, and M&A in general, particularly the diligence cycle, is taking longer. It's taking longer because we have to take a deeper look. We have to look more broadly, really have to look for a valuation that's fair, given that given all the factors that this particular target, as the case may be, is dealing with. And as we look to technology, we can use technology as a risk mitigation, as a way of mitigating some of these risks, and really improving the value proposition. So if you're a seller, you've got to start looking for things like, how do I become more attractive to a buyer, and how can I use technology to help mitigate the risks in that deal as well as in the supply chain. I mentioned before that ESG is playing a bigger role. Deloitte did a study recently, and what I found interesting is that, based on the surveys that they sent out, and it's roughly 250, only 9% had no plans of buying or selling based on ESG and the impact that ESG can have on your brand. I found this very enlightening. I hadn't realized that ESG had been so pervasive, but when you start talking to private equity firms and you start talking to these big buyers, um, it is obviously become more prevalent. So what does that mean? It's becoming a much bigger deal, which means that, when you look at investors and consumers and governments, there's a lot of pressure on organizations now to have an ESG strategy and a plan. And you look at what's happening in food companies, for example. We have to make sure that there's no, that we look at animal welfare and child labor and food fraud, and where are these ingredients coming from? Are they organic? Do we care for the environment as a means of developing those food and ingredients? Um, and ESG is not just considered to be risk mitigation exercise anymore. Some companies are using it to drive valuation um, as a part of their operating model. So if you look at Tier Mobility's acquisition of electric bike and scooter operator Spin, they looked for 100% replaceable batteries, and they were using reusable technology that showed a lot of environmental sustainability, and it really drove their value proposition. On the flip side, we're also um, organizations have to be careful about what's called greenwashing, basically making statements that you do have an ESG plan, that you are environmentally sound, and that diligence can be conducted. But while there's no standard way of reporting on these claims, when you make a claim, there's no standard way of positioning that claim. There is more diligence being put into the area of ESG and um, as a means of mitigating the risk of any sort of regulatory scrutiny. Organizations should be mindful then that if you're going to make a claim, you should be able to support it with analytics. So if we look to 2023, there's really four factors driving M&A activity in 23, and they're not great, actually. They're really going to put a hamper on things. If you look at multiples, there's no guarantee now that multiples are going up, especially after EBITDA multiples have been declining for several quarters now. The cost of capital because of interest rates have gone way up. And in fact, the deals that you did last year are probably costing you more money today, depending on how they were structured. And so the ability to have the capital ready, unless you're a PE firm with a lot of dry powder, if you're a strategic, you may have the capital runway, but it's certainly going to cost you more today and in 23 than it did, just 2 years ago. Focus on margins. We always talk about focus on margins, but with inflation so high, we really have to focus on margin stability, and making sure we're doing the diligence to make sure that those margins are being sustained, and not eroded. And then, as we just talked, disrupted supply and service, right? So what are we doing to ensure that that labor shortages, um, which will continue in 23, service delays. We've built up a tremendous amount of inventory now. I've had the pleasure of being out in the West Coast, and prior to joining Hartman, I was in the distribution and logistics business. The warehouses are stuffed, warehouses are full, and there are actually reports of people looking for warehousing, not in, not in the LA area. Rather, they're moving as far east as Illinois for warehousing space. We've got clients now that have, they were never in the warehousing business, but because of the nature of business and trying to de-risk, they too they've got warehouses now, and those warehouses are all full, which are going to drive carry costs and incremental expenses. And so as we look to 2023, we've got to try to make sure that that we mitigate and minimize those service and supply interruptions. So what's it all mean? If you're a buyer, there's really no guarantee that your multiples are going up. So that's something to consider. And you're going to be very focused on profitability. We'll be looking to, what is the organic strategy, the organic growth strategy, and how are we driving profit through that? If you're a seller, you really have to start reevaluating your valuations, because buyers are looking at your business through a lens that says, I've got to run this business moving forward. Most sellers are looking at their business saying, well, over the past 18 months, we've had this great run. And so there's a little bit of delay between the buyer's expectations of valuations and the seller's expectation of valuation and the buyer's expectations. And that's creating some tension. So if you really do want to sell, you've got to be more pragmatic, or you've got to look at other alternatives than a sale. Okay, so with all of that, we start looking at some of the M&A pitfalls. So we'll talk about common causes, some case studies, and some lessons learned. But before we do, I'd like to launch our second polling question here. So what do you see as the primary reason for failed acquisitions, based on your experience or based on what you've heard or read? So I see wrong strategy, wrong strategic fit, some diligence misses, integration. Okay. So yeah, I think it's it's kind of all the above. But as we look at a survey, and we looked at, why do acquisitions fail? BCG did some of this work. Fully 60% of deals fail to deliver the vision and value envisioned at closure. This is really important. This isn't at strategy. This isn't at target identification. This is at deal close. When you sign, 60% of the deals do not deliver on the full value that you envisioned when you sign that deal. That's still pretty staggering. And as we look to why that is, almost 80% had no integration plan. So if you said no integration, or if you said that the root cause was integration, that was certainly one of the issues. 63% have no technology plan. 70% had no synergy plan or dyssynergy plan, as the case might be. 82% lost over 10% of their acquired workforce, regrettable losses or unplanned turnover, whatever way you want to describe it. These are people that you needed to keep and didn't. And so as we look at the strategy, the business strategy of why you're doing acquisitions and aligning that business strategy to your diligence strategy, which then informs your integration strategy. These things are not discrete and unrelated. Many organizations treat them that way, but this is more of a process and a process flow than it is very discrete activities. Yes, there are discrete activities within each of those process areas, but taken together, you get a much better and a much stronger value realization. You get a much better shot at achieving the value envisioned at signing and at when you issue that LOI, when you start piecing these things together. So some of the pitfalls, they exist at every step in the process. So we talk about strategy. Who should we buy? Who and why? I mean, this is a fundamental question, and I have to tell you, I'm constantly surprised by how many organizations don't answer this fundamental question. Why are we buying this organization? And really challenging the thought process behind it. Um, I had done a deal. This is a long time ago with a very large blue organization that was looking to get on the desktop. Um, so at that time, this is old enough, it's no longer confidential, but IBM was looking to buy Lotus Notes. And John Thompson, who ran software group for IBM, came to us and we had done the valuation and we came back and we told him, said, John, this doesn't make any sense. It's dilutive to earnings for the next 10 years. So our advice is don't buy Lotus. And so he informed us that Lou had already done the deal, that he wanted to, Lou Gerstner, that was the CEO of IBM, had already done the deal, and he wanted to be on the desktop, and that was his strategy, be on the desktop. And so yes, if you're wondering, it was dilutive to earnings for 10 years, but um, that is what it is. But to be able to go into a strategy with saying, who are we going to buy and why? That's why is the most important question there. Diligence, as we look at diligence, what price should we pay? What's the value we're going to realize? And what's that value case? What is the timing of that value and the risk? And then in integration, how do we do it? How do we put these things together? How do we make sense of it all? What are we going to simplify, standardize? Are we going to be centralized? Are we going to treat this as a portfolio? Are we going to be regional or federated? And then what's the role of technology in all that? And how do we align technology to this new operating model called NewCo? And when does this happen? Over what time horizon will this integration take? Or is it true integration? But again, that is all tied together as a part of your decision process. So if we look at some of those strategy pitfalls, looking at strategic fit, um, you know, not defining the value case well, and fundamentally being culturally misaligned. We've got a client that is very acquisitive, and they spend a lot of time initially trying to meet the organization, get a sense for their culture and their people, their values, and really make sure that there's alignment that at that most granular level. They've identified them as a potential target, and therefore, they know roughly the fit. But as we look to mitigate those strategies, on the right side, right, it's go back to your business strategy, fundamentally align this target with why you're buying this business and what are the guiding principles that are driving your growth. And is this target then aligned to those guiding principles and those growth strategies? Got to do real rigorous financial, organizational, cultural analysis, if you will, understand those attributes. Um, Look at refreshing your M&A blueprint and look at how M&A is going to be used to drive the business strategy. How much of that business strategy is organic and how much is it in M&A, and how are you going to use M&A to get into new markets, new channels, new products, etc. And to make sure that you're aligning that acquisition to that strategy. And then look at, what are your M&A objectives into a prioritized set of themes around value creation. Diligence pitfalls, overpaying, overestimating the synergies, underestimating the timing, and looking at some of the cyber risks. Again, this gets back to very solid due diligence. Um, and our guidance here is, when you do this, please bring a team of people that understand your industry, understand your business, bring good, solid legal advice, financial, IT, and cyber experts. You've got a master diligence request list that's going to have a lot of things, a lot of information. Don't skip any steps here. This is really important. The diligence process informs your integration process. So it's going to identify the risks. It's going to identify the sources of opportunity, of synergy, of dyssynergy. The other thing is, be conservative. Don't overestimate your revenue. Be mindful of the potential risk and turnover of clients. In the credit card industry, I can't tell you how many times there have been mergers without an idea of what our customers going to do. Nobody asked the customers what they thought about this merger. And when you get a 30-40% turnover because someone doesn't like this customer, understanding those customer values is important. So don't forget to overlook that. And then consider some of the post-deal challenges of integrating two organizations. Sometimes the teams just don't work well together, and that does have an impact. We've got a client right now that is very acquisitive. We bought this company, and now it's about getting this the acquired organization on board, and to do it at the pace that they're accustomed to, and they're having some challenges with that. And then on integration, some of those risks and pitfalls include making sure you're not overlooking employees, right? It's the heart of the organization. Make sure you're taking care of people, right? And so we create that stickiness for them. You're looking at, some of the issues are around missed growth and cost targets. And how can you manage that through the integration process? Again, can't emphasize enough that your diligence process informs your integration process. So your integration process stays focused on some of these issues, the issues and risks that come out, that you can focus your plan around mitigating those risks. Looking at business processes and systems and how they're going to come together and what problems, what process problems are going to solve. Where do you need to be differentiated? Where do you need to be standardized? Are you going to be centralized, distributed, federated? What's that model going to look like, and how quickly can you get there? And again, looking at that value case and how we can move that value case along as quickly as we can. Again, be conservative. If you're gonna estimate top line growth estimates and have some good forecasting capabilities, be conservative about this. All right, so I'm going to be mindful of time here. I want to get into a couple of case studies. I'm not going to go through them all, but we'll get through a couple of them. The first one is selling is easy, buying is hard. The second one is M&A is easy if you've never done it. We've got clients that have never done transactions and are fully convinced they can do it on their own. Um, separate the deal makers from the integration team. These are a little bit tongue in cheek the way I've organized them, but um, I will talk about selling is easy. Um, buying is hard. We have a client, a multi-billion dollar organization that was looking to divest itself to its primary assets to two different buyers. And so when we get involved, we asked, is this an asset deal or a stock deal? And the CFO said, well, that's probably a question we should have thought of, months ago. And this was a month before closing. Um, they're they didn't have a transaction execution process. And so and they wanted to close at year end. And so that was really a non-starter for them. They didn't actually get to close till almost a year later. Um, the seller itself didn't have a carve-out plan, didn't know how it was going to handle systems, and it really delayed the closing. They didn't want to provide a TSA, transition services agreement, which is very difficult in that case. When you're selling off your assets, you generally do need a TSA in place for transition. But we did work through that. We helped them get through that, and buyer one, of course, there were two buyers. Buyer one had agreed to take on the TSA and provide it to buyer two. The point here is it doesn't matter how big you are. If you don't follow a comprehensive process, you run the risk of delaying your deal and delaying the value from that deal. And in this case, these guys lost a full year's worth of value. Um, and we'll get into a software reseller in this case. Acquired multiple companies. They had never done an integration plan. M&A was fairly new to them when they started some time ago. But the diligence process was really done at a very high level and was kind of thumbnail, if you will. It didn't have a rigorous IT component and completely missed on major cybersecurity risks. Um, and it really lacked an element of operational rigor. Again, when you're an organization that's acquisitive and you're looking for key indicators, yes, this is an asset or an organization that we want to acquire because of these characteristics. You really do have to protect your value case by making sure your diligence is done and followed. Yeah, it can be a lengthy process, but going through that process really mitigates your risk. So what have we learned, right? In terms of lessons learned, M&A is a team sport. Don't do it alone. Don't go it alone. It is a dangerous thing to do. And before you get into a transaction, make sure you've got your team assembled, a financial advisor, an accountant, a lawyer, a business advisor, and an IT advisor. And don't think your law firms, if there's any lawyers on this, it's no disrespect, but don't think your lawyers are the firms that are going to negotiate your business terms. They're great at the legal terms. Um, and, you know, when it comes to IT, focus with somebody who can help you really get to the bottom of your IT issues so that you, A, identify and mitigate those risks, and B, you accelerate the value realization through integration. Um, really embrace an M&A methodology. This sounds like it's a lot. And, on paper it can look like a lot, but methodologies are designed to really mitigate your risk and to make sure you get the value you want to get out of this transaction. And you've probably heard it before, but some of the best deals are the ones you don't do because they're bad deals. And I've been a part of those walkaways many times. I'm just going to go through this just quickly here. Another survey, and then we'll kind of bring it to a close. In your experience or from what you've read, what do you find is the most challenging part of an M&A transaction? Yeah, so we have valuation and diligence, and yeah, that's it. None of this is truly easy, um, for sure. Um, it seems like we've got most of our respondents in the valuation camp. That is a heavy lift, and getting alignment on that valuation is a heavy lift, especially today, particularly today where you've got, buyers looking for better valuations. You've got sellers thinking that their valuations are really kind of in their rear view mirror, and there's tension between those two. And we're part of a set of transactions where we're advising organizations to walk away. I mean, if you can't get the value, you can't get the valuation you want, you need to walk away from those deals and give the seller a chance, to get to a more normalized value. Um, I'm going to go through the next couple slides and then we'll open it up for questions. But we have a way of thinking about these transactions, and it's designed really to, based on your needs. It's a framework we use to help organizations understand some of the interdependencies. So if you're on the buy side, is this a stock or an asset deal? And then how does that impact some of the risks and some of the focus, based on that? If you're on the sell side, is it going to be an entire legal entity, or are you going to do a carve out? Um, and again, how does that impact things, and what are some of those pitfalls? Um, so in the stock side, really looking at synergies and value realization risks, right? By not integrating the target. If you don't integrate the target, then you really have to take a serious look on what that value case is. Diligence risks on liabilities. Really need to do a deep dive on the liabilities, because as a stock deal, you're getting those too. Um, and then, what liabilities are going to be transferring with the deal. On an asset buy, yeah, it's more complex. Getting ready for day one. You've got to make sure you're really engaging with customer, suppliers, your partners, your employees, because that's where you want to make sure people understand, if I'm staying with the business, what's my role? If I'm not, you've got to make sure that's clear too. Um, and then the buyer is reliant on the seller for a TSA, and to make sure that that gets done. Um, some of the pitfalls of selling an entity, really looking at reverse diligence misses. So we encourage, if you're on the sell side, we encourage companies to do reverse due diligence. Take a critical look at your organization through the lens of a buyer, and make those improvements to get a better sale price. If you don't do that, you do run the risk of being discounted. Um, there tends to be a smaller pool of buyers, um, and you really have no tie to the business, afterwards. And then carve outs, looking at stranded costs, doing it, having issues with an unidentified RTSA, a reverse, services agreement, transaction services agreement. Um, Looking at talent and where that talent is transferred, and what to do with those gaps. How do I handle that transition? How do I handle people staying, people leaving? Because those do tend to be, a real brain drain on the remaining organization. Um, and then quality of earnings. You need to have a buyer needs to have a quality of earnings. And then day one readiness, of course, that tends to be a little bit more complex in getting ready for that. So the last two slides I have, one is around, buy side asset deal with a window between sign and close. A lot of organizations don't realize that these two options are with a window and simultaneous sign and close. And when we talk to organizations about the importance of having this discussion, most will say, well, I'm just assuming we're going to sign and close in the same day. Well, what if you had a window and you had an option and an opportunity to do a little bit more work between sign and close, as a way of, creating a better communication plan or what have you. But the process does different. It is different. So when you look at simultaneous sign and close versus one with a window, it does create a lot more pressure. There's a lot more work to be done, in order to enable a day one that's on signing. So with that, our last survey question of the day is, most of you have M&A experience, and so when you think about participating in a transaction, whether it's buy or sell side, how do you staff those? Do you guys do it alone? Do you have a partner? Um, do you leave it up to your leadership team? How do you guys execute M&A today? So it looks like we have a combination of a formally established cross-functional team, which is very important, and engaging some outside help. Yeah, I'll say here that it's really important to have cross-functional representation across the enterprise, because in almost all cases, you're cutting across these functions and understanding the implications of either bringing something in or taking something away. Excuse me. Pardon me. Is really important as part of this deal. And again, don't go it alone. You need a partner to do this, unless you're a professional firm that does this for a living.